Now, talk about being run over. Bad news today about our new submarines. The Morrison government panicked last year, and rightly so. China is threatening war, particularly over Taiwan. Yesterday, for instance, it sent 7 more warplanes into Taiwan's air defence zone to test the defences. And, of course, to lull us all into sort of boredom. You know, we've seen that before. One day the planes flying in, they won't just be another harmless scare. Surprise, this one's for real. Bombs fall. Anyway, the Morrison government figured this subs deal that we had with France, it was a dud. The subs would be diesel, not nuclear, and the first wouldn't be built until the middle of next decade, too late. So we needed to get much better subs, and sooner if possible. So the Morrison government tore up the deal with France and signed a new deal with America and the UK to get us nuclear subs. In fact, Defence Minister Peter Dutton said we might even lease nuclear subs from them while we waited for our own.
Will you consider leasing or buying existing submarines from the US and UK in the meantime?
The short answer is yes. I mean, there's all of that discussion to take place in the next 12 to 18 months, and already, obviously, I've met with a number of my counterparts here, from the Secretary down, in terms of those that are making decisions, and we'll have further discussions with the Brits as well.
But today, frightening news in Senate estimates. The head of the Defence Department and the head of our new nuclear subs program said that the first of these new subs from the US or Britain or whatever, they won't come until the end of the next decade. And forget leasing any in the meantime.
We are confident that we'll have a boat in the water by the end of the next decade, but the work they need to do with the US and UK in the next 18 months is to drive that timeline as far left as possible.
A boat?
Yes, a boat.
Meaning
by the end of the next
one
decade.
Boat?
That is the right-hand marker, Senator.
So the public discussions about leasing submarines, those are not on the table, is that right?
No, Senator. Okay. What we are going to do over the next 18 months is work with our partners to identify how soon we can get a boat, an Australian boat.
But Australian sovereign submarine capability, just so we're really clear, we extend the Collins for as long as possible and hope that can go long enough for us to get the time to get a nuclear submarine in the water. Correct? That's the government's current plan. Pretty risky, don't you reckon?
Senator, the Prime Minister has said this is a high-risk program.
Michael Shoebridge was a former senior defence and intelligence official, is now at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute as director of its Defence Strategy and National Security Program. I asked him, how bad is this news?
Well, I think anyone that expected that nuclear submarines could be built for the Australian Navy fast was living on a different planet. And we heard today at the Senate estimates testimony from defence officials that they're aiming to get one submarine for the Australian Navy before 2040 and more than one if that's possible. And then there's a whole lot of pressure to accelerate the nuclear submarines. But really, the one acquisition and construction program we shouldn't want to accelerate is one that's building new nuclear submarines that Australia has never had before and our industry has never made before. We should focus our time and attention on everything else we can put into our military's hands in the next 5 and 10 years.
Such as?
Well, there's if you look at that AUKUS announcement, it told us a lot of things like long-range strike missiles. These things exist now, and there are advanced plans to make some of them in Australia rather than just rely on slow-to-deliver US and European supply chains. There's Boeing's Loyal Wingman unmanned aircraft, which is a really capable weapons platform that makes Australia a harder target. And there are undersea systems other than submarines, unmanned submarines that can be weapons as well. All of these things can make Australia a harder military target and can help Australia work with others to deter China from military conflict.
But sticking with the subs for now, was cancelling the deal with the French to build diesel submarines a mistake when we won't get the first of these new nuclear submarines for 4 or 5 years later than the French were promising?
Well, I'm not sure we had confidence in that schedule from the attack class program that's been cancelled. But I think the bigger reason it was right to cancel it was we were paying too much and it was taking way too long to get too little. A big diesel electric submarine with lead acid batteries was at the end of its development curve as a weapon. And getting something that's right at the end of its development curve and taking so long was a mistake. So I think we look at submarines a bit like Homer Simpson's line about the pig, like it's the one magical animal. We need to be thinking much more creatively about alternative weapons that make our military a much harder problem.
I'm hearing what you're saying. I just think with the sub, perhaps it is better to wait a couple of years longer to get a better sub in the first place. But no doubt our defence people know a little more than I do. Michael Shoebridge, China has meanwhile offered to help the Taliban rebuild Afghanistan. The Taliban's just conquered Afghanistan in exchange for the Taliban's cooperation to get rid of Islamist terrorist groups that China claims are stirring up its Muslim Uyghur population. China's foreign minister actually met the Taliban's deputy prime minister yesterday to discuss this. What on earth is going on here?
Well, I think the picture starts to tell us the really stark contrast. I mean, look at the sophisticated Chinese foreign minister Wang meeting with the Taliban terrorist leader Mullah Baradar. And it was a fascinating meeting. What we heard out of it was the Chinese minister Wang says, look, what we don't want out of Afghanistan is trouble crossing into China in Xinjiang, the place where we're repressing all our Muslim citizens. And he treated the Taliban leader like he was a standover man, with the Taliban saying, nice border region you've got there, shame if it got broken. And then he says to the Taliban leader, to Baradar, so I'll pay you off. I'll give you a reconstruction if you promise not to bring me any trouble. And Baradar then reveals his real problem. He says, oh, let me assure you that we're in control of security in Afghanistan. And so he sounded not like a standover man, but more like a chef with smoke coming out of the kitchen, and he's trying to reassure the diners everything's fine. So it was a really odd meeting. But the big thing for me was the power relationship is the reverse to what you hear. The power relationship is in the Taliban's favour. They have the capacity to cause China a whole lot of problems, and China knows it.
But it also gets China involved in Afghanistan when America's trying to keep its hands clean. So this is very, very interesting. This story's got a long way to run. The Taliban, of course, has got its own Islamist terror problem too, with the Islamic State being even more radical than Taliban and causing trouble and bombings and all that. So goodness knows. I think I'll be talking to you more about this, Michael Shoebridge. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Andrew.